I have the pleasure of calling Dr. Onyema Ogbuagu.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Yes. So I also want to congratulate Dr. Folarin. Just hearing about the scope of work that has gone on over many years and just how relevant and groundbreaking it is. As one who's a specialist in infectious disease, I have a very unique appreciation of how critical and important the work you're doing is, and to just think that this is going on not even in the largest city in Nigeria, but in Edo State, if I'm not wrong. That's just amazing, and more grease to your elbows. Just by way of introduction, I'm Onyema Ogbuagu. I'm Nigerian trained. I trained in University of Calabar in Nigeria, and did my internal medicine and infectious disease subspecialty training in the United States. I'm currently an associate professor of medicine and infectious disease at Yale University, and also director of HIV clinical trials. So my portfolio really is dealing with HIV therapeutics and prevention. And obviously since COVID-19 hit, we've since pivoted to really working on COVID-19 treatment trials and vaccines. And so today I'm going to limit the conversation to COVID-19 vaccines, but I've also tried to really try to present data that I think would be most relevant to this audience, especially as regards to some of the very common questions you have around the vaccine. And so that's why I have not really termed my title Using Data to Combat Myths, and I'm hoping that we can have a robust conversation afterwards. So my disclosures are as listed. I will not let any of my relationship with the pharmaceutical companies impact this current presentation. And you know that one thing we've had to rely on in this COVID era are sometimes non-peer reviewed data, press releases, and preprint articles, but that's important because that's the way we've been able to share information among us within the scientific community. So which allows us, it does take a while to have data peer reviewed and published in journals, which is a good way to ensure that only the highest quality data is presented in scientific form. But I think we've needed to share information much faster, in other words, to accelerate sharing among ourselves. And so I will be presenting some of that data as well. I'll start with a quote as well, like the previous speaker. And, one of the common questions people ask me is, if the virus has risks, or if the vaccine has risks, or if there are unknowns about the virus, why should I take the virus? Why should I take the vaccine? And I think most of us will agree that it's, much rather have the vaccine than have the virus. We're learning that a significant proportion of people who have COVID-19 never fully recover and have what they call long COVID syndrome, which we're only beginning to learn so much about. So in other words, persistent symptoms. There's some fascinating data recently that has shown that people, a very high proportion of people post-COVID develops all kinds of neurologic conditions or even neuropsychiatric disorders, which is just fascinating. So, there's so many consequences to the virus beyond just the mortality. And this is an important message, especially for younger people who think that this is a lethal disease for the elderly, or I don't have medical comorbidities, or conditions that put me at high risk for coming down with the virus. Again, the message is that getting the vaccine always more important than and better idea than getting the virus itself. So I just wanted to show that I think that certain lessons we've learned from other pandemics, including, when West Africa faced its first Ebola-19 pandemic between 2014 and 2016. I think there's certain things that we learned, not just, as a global community, on how we need to address pandemics. And I think it's actually very important because some of these lessons we learned has served us well with COVID-19. So certain things are that when you have an outbreak, you really have a very limited reaction and response time. And so being able to accelerate clinical trials that don't compromise safety are important. And we'll again be talking about that with the vaccines, because I know some people have concerns about how quickly the vaccines were developed. And when we have diseases like COVID-19 that have a rapid clinical course, is actually a good thing, because you can actually rapidly evaluate therapies and vaccines for prevention and or treatment, because if you have a rapid clinical course, you can easily tell if something works or it doesn't work by studying patient outcomes. But even more importantly has been how important it is to have collaborations. And this is collaborations with people who don't usually collaborate. You can see from the prior presentation, it takes a community to move the research needle forward. And this has really required collaboration between pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries, academic institutions and researchers like myself, even regulators that approve medical devices and products have had to play a role here. And even our political institutions and governments and public health officials have all had to come together to really work together to try and address the pandemic. And so that's really important and has continued to serve us well. But more importantly, and not the least important, is the need to work with local communities. For example, we're learning that with the COVID-19 vaccines, right, that there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy among certain communities. And if we don't, while we're advancing with the science and the clinical trials, we need to make sure that in tandem, at the same time, in parallel, that we're also working with local community stakeholders who would be on the receiving end of these newly developed therapies and vaccines, to be sure that we communicate effectively the data, the science, in language people can understand, address their concerns and their myths. Then we can be successful. You can have a highly effective vaccine and it has very little public relevance if people don't take the vaccine. So we need the communities to be accepting of these scientific breakthroughs to maximize the public health impact, as you can imagine. So here's the landscape. I'm not going to go through much of this, but just to show you that there's still a lot of activity around trying to find vaccines that work using very different platforms. If you look at the table on the right, you clearly see that the two categories of vaccines that have really emerged for COVID-19, which are relatively novel technologies that hadn't, in some cases prior to COVID-19, never been approved for human use. So the messenger RNAs, this would be the first time that messenger RNA vaccines are authorized or approved for human use, and they've done excellently well. Another group of vaccines, and not quite as new to advanced human trials, we know that there's an Ebola viral vector vaccine using the vesicular stomatitis virus that's approved, at least in the US, by our FDA, and actually is deployed to Guinea to address the current outbreak that they're having. But there are many viral vector vaccines developed in the UK and the US through collaborations, and also outside the US, that have really been the lead vaccine candidates. And I know, AstraZeneca has featured prominently in COVAX and has been one of the, beyond the Pfizer vaccine, one of the most widely used vaccines among almost, I think by the last count, almost 130 countries. And then there's a smattering of other vaccine platforms, the protein-based viral vaccines, like Novavax is probably the most common because there's some data from South Africa on that, as well as the inactivated viral vaccines, or many of these are made in China. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of the data from the inactivated viruses published, so I won't have too much to say about that. Anyway, the bottom line is that the reason why we need many effective vaccines is just a numbers game, right? So we know that, even though so many countries like Israel, the United Kingdom, and the United States are rapidly ramping up, accelerating their vaccines, we know that so many countries in the world may not even get to be able to vaccinate up to 20% of their population, even far out into 2022. So there's inequity with vaccine availability and access. And so it's really important that we have as many highly effective and safe vaccines so that we can meet a global demand. And remember, with COVID-19 spreading, again, just trying to link with the previous presentation, we're seeing that anywhere the virus continues to circulate, that there continues to be mutations arising. And I think the fascinating thing about some of the variants that are emerging are that they're happening literally at the same time in different parts of the world. So it's as if the virus is evolving almost at the same pace in different parts of the world. And we're seeing almost the same pattern of new mutations develop in different parts of the world fueled by circulating virus. So if we don't vaccinate enough, if we don't get to herd immunity, we run the risk of still future variants. And even where one country has been successful in addressing their own local epidemic, all it takes is a new variant that the vaccine immunity developed by the older version of vaccines don't work against. That would certainly compromise the efficacy of vaccines and can lead to reintroduction of COVID-19, even in countries that think that they have snuffed out their epidemics.